Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Sicard Jimenez, and I am a Colombian American Master's candidate here at Johns Hopkins, board member of the Latin American Studies Club, and policy associate at Council of the Americas, focusing on the rule of law, organized crime, and human rights in the Americas. On behalf of the SAIS community and the SNF Agora Institute, I want to welcome you to this timely discussion on Venezuela's transition to democracy and its significance to our hemisphere. This conversation will follow the overwhelming victory of President-elect Edmundo González Urrutia, who, having received 70% of the vote on July 28th, was unable to assume office after Maduro's refusal to recognize the results and step down. This, as acknowledged by a range of actors in the international community and the United States, was an outright theft of the people's will and attack on the democratic norms that institutions like Johns Hopkins SAIS are founded on. Now more than ever, democracy is being placed to the test, abroad and at home. July 28th showed the world that the voice of a people can, in fact, be oppressed and be eradicated. That this has the power to spark the world's largest migration crisis, with more than 8 million Venezuelans forced to flee their homes in search of political and economic refuge. That at the most fundamental level, this remains a humanitarian crisis, one which democracies worldwide cannot ignore. It is our mission at SAIS to create forums for these discussions, and more importantly, inspire solutions in supporting democratic governance. Today, we have the honor of hosting Democratic Opposition Leader Maria Corina Machado, Mr. President-elect Edmundo González Urrutia, and SNF Agora Fellow and Descendant David Smolansky. And allow me to introduce all of them briefly. Maria Corina is the Democratic Opposition Leader and National Coordinator of Vente Venezuela. Having won 93% of the vote in the October 2023 primary, she was banned from running in the presidential election and garnered her efforts in endorsing Edmundo's candidacy. She worked to collect 80% of the nation's tally sheets, proving the president-elect to have won the race. She has been awarded the 2024 Václav Havel Human Rights Prize and has been named one of the BBC's 100 most influential and inspiring leaders in the world. Maria Corina, it is my honor as a young woman working in the Americas myself to be welcoming you to our community. Mr. President-elect Edmundo González is a politician, analyst, former diplomat, and Venezuela's president-elect. His role as the international representative for the Democratic Unity Roundtable led him to his presidential victory this past July. Regional actors, academics, and multilateral organizations have voiced their support for his victory and denounced the regime for disrespecting the electoral results. Having been at American University for your master's, Edmundo, we welcome you back to your home in Washington and now SAIS with open arms. This dialogue will be moderated by my dear friend and mentor, David Smolansky. David is the Deputy Director of the Con Venezuela Presidential Campaign and former mayor of El Atillo in Caracas, but has been in exile in Washington, D.C. since 2017 after the issuance of an arbitrary arrest from the Maduro regime. He served for 5 years as a special envoy to the Organization of American States to address the Venezuelan refugee crisis and is currently a fellow at the SNF Agora Institute, Frontline of Freedom Fellow at Renew Democracy Initiative, and distinguished SAIS alum. We hope that you will gain from an honest and transparent discussion on the implications of Venezuela in the hemisphere, especially in the light of the U.S. administration's prioritization of Latin America this term. Tonight, our speakers will be joining us online. Due to the regime's brutal repression, President-elect González was forced into exile, and Maria Corina is still on the ground in Venezuela in a safe house. This building has hosted a multitude of leaders, as many of you know, and we hope to one day host Mr. President-elect González and Maria Corina in person. With so much at stake in our geopolitical landscape, Venezuela and the hemisphere at large must remain a priority for SAIS, as the situation holds relevance in the Middle East, in China, and beyond. Thank you again for your attention and your curiosity, and please join me in welcoming President-elect Edmundo González, Maria Corina Machado, and David Smolansky this evening.
institution across the region. At the same time, Maduro has weaponized hyperinflation, the worst in record history, to liquidate internal debt while pushing millions of Venezuelans into exile. At the same time, more than 8 million of our citizens have fled hyperinflation, exodus the worst in record history, to liquidate internal debt while pushing millions.
Good evening to the SAIS community, SNF Agora Institute, um, diplomats, policymakers, and fellows Venezuelans, and also good evening to the SAIS. I have enough voice to do this without mic. If the problems continues. And also, it's good to see familiar faces here with us that were part of the science community, and also I'm happy to be here with our Democratic opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who has just joined us live from a safe house in Venezuela. You can listen those applause from Washington D.C. Um, So when I started to be part of the Johns Hopkins community 3 years ago, when I started my MIPP at SAIS, and now as a Agora Institute fellow at the Baltimore campus. One of my goals was to put Venezuela on the radar, to raise awareness on the ongoing human rights violations, the suffering of our people, the rampant criminality, and the massive migration crisis. Today, nearly 3 years after I started this journey, I'm happy that we are having an event in this Bloomberg Center with our president-elect, Edmundo González Urrutia, who recorded this message for us, and as I just presented, our Democratic opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. This is a place where presidents, prime ministers, global leaders have spoken, and it is deeply meaningful that today representative of Venezuela's democratic movement stand here as well, and probably not in the conventional way as we are used to see here at SAIS or at Baltimore, because me is in exile, Edmundo González Urrutia is also in exile, and Maria Corina Machado is in a safe house. So we have to use some creativity to have this event. But to understand the present, we must acknowledge how much we have achieved in the past 2 years. By 2023, Venezuela was hopeless. The opposition, and it's not a secret, was fragmented and divided. And the best proof for me to this situation that we were living 2 years ago was that 350,000 Venezuelans crossed the Dariel Gap only in 2023. On that context, which was very difficult, we decided to do a primary election. And despite the repression and the social control imposed by the regime, 2.6 million Venezuelans went to the polls in October 23, and with a 93% outcome, Maria Corina Machado was elected the presidential candidate. But Venezuelans didn't choose only a candidate. Venezuelans chose a leader. When we were preparing for the July 24 presidential elections to face dictator Nicolás Maduro, the regime disqualified illegally Maria Corina for running. Instead of giving up, the democratic opposition united behind Edmundo González, and who was in that moment unknown for the vast majority of the countries. And this decision was made only 100 days before the presidential election. Our campaign faced many obstacles, probably the most difficult from any presidential election in the history of Latin America. No media coverage. More than 120 members of our team were illegally detained. 4.5 million Venezuelans out of the 8 million migrants were illegally banned for voting. But instead of breaking us, these challenges united our nation like never before. Venezuelans outside and Venezuelans inside. President González Urrutia went from being unknown to becoming a household name. His campaign relied on creativity and technology to counter the regime's persecution. WhatsApp became our primary tool, not just for spreading information, but also for organizing rallies and monitoring the vote. Maria Corina Machado was banned from flying during the campaign, and she can describe more of that on her presentation. Just imagine here in the US, in a presidential campaign, and someone needs to rally in California and is in Washington, D.C. So it has to drive from here to California because you're banned for taking a flight. That was the obstacles that Maria Corina faced during the campaign. She was driving for 8 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, and even she took a fish boat to the Margarita Island to do a rally. But on July 28th, despite the most repressive and unfair elections conditions that we have ever seen, 7 million Venezuelans courageously went to the polls and elected Edmundo González with 70% of the vote. The 4 million vote margin over Nicolás Maduro was the largest gap in Venezuelan presidential election history. To manipulate the vote, I have to say that Maduro's face appeared 15 times on the ballot to confuse voters and obscure González's name, but it did not work. And we say we won, and this is not just rhetorical. The most powerful act of resistance came after the vote when 1 million citizens were organized as poll watchers volunteer, and mobilizers. We secured 85% of the voting tallies, proving Edmundo Gonzalez was elected president. Using a digital strategy that caught the regime by surprise, we uploaded these tallies to a public website, accessible to anyone in this room and anywhere. This unprecedented civil movement has led governments, parliaments, electoral experts, and academics to recognize these results. And just let me do something. These are probably our second document of independence for us. These are original voting tallies that were gathered, were collected by that million people that we organize. Thousands of them right now are political prisoners, were forced to flee the country, and we brought a small um, portion of this that you can see live that has become so powerful that many governments have recognized Edmundo Gonzalez as president. On that regard, I want to take this opportunity to announce that the SNF Agora Institute, where I am a fellow, will publish the technical electoral report of the July 28th election. This will serve as an essential reference for understanding how civic movement can challenge authoritarianism and fight for democracy. That report will be published during the next month, and it will be a reference for any faculty or any student or anyone that want to know more about that effort that we did. But the fight has continued until today. Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello were the first to know they lost on July 28th election. Their only response has been a brutal repression. According to the United Nations fact-finding mission, the level of persecution since the elections has reached unprecedented levels. And according to Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, Venezuela is under a state of terrorism, which is something that has not been stated by the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights since the dictatorship of the Southern Corn during the 1970s. Since July 28th, more than 2,000 people have been illegally detained, including hundreds of women and minors. At least 30 people have been killed by security forces. 4 have been killed under custody on the jails. Women have been sexually abused, and minors have been brutally tortured, physically and psychologically. The persecution has forced President González Urrutia into exile and has confined Maria Corina Machado to a safe house. To understand the depth of Venezuela's crisis, we must examine the role of external actors sustaining the regime. Cuban intelligence agents have become whistleblowers in communities where they have facilitated information to intelligence and counterintelligence agencies to illegally detain volunteers on July 28th election. The same United Nations fact-finding mission has said that the Cubans agents participate and advise on tortures in Venezuela. At the same time, China has provided technology for censorship and social control, including internet restrictions, 47, which some of them we have known that have ended in non-state armed groups and terrorist groups such as ELN. The regime's survival is not based on legitimacy or popular support. Instead, it relies on foreign allies, authoritarian allies, military control, and criminal networks, making Venezuela a hub for transnational crime that threatens not only Latin America, but also US national security. But what doesn't the regime have? The regime doesn't have the people. The regime doesn't have the leaders. The regime doesn't have the trust. The regime doesn't have the credibility. The regime doesn't have the sacrifice, courage, and the unbreakable conviction of millions who are fighting for democracy. The regime doesn't have the honest and good public servants that are ready to be part of the transition and be part of the rebuilding of the country. I had to flee Venezuela 8 years ago in 2017. That's when I arrived to Washington, D.C. I was a mayor, as it was said, of El Latillo in Caracas. I was ready to get reelected after we had a 74% of approval because we were able to decrease crime, tackle corruption, and be part of many of the nonviolent protests challenging Maduro and Diosdado. Maduro and Diosdado issued an illegal arrest warrant against me that also forced me to be in a safe house for 35 days, and then forced me to disguise as a priest, wore a flat hat, shaved my beard, wore glasses, and start a journey that took me between 3 and 4 days and more than 1,000 kilometers until I fled my country through a jungle and got to Brazil. Then from Brazil, I just came to Washington, D.C. because a good friend of mine was living here and he offered me just a couch to sleep there to see what happened. One of the first people that I called when I left Venezuela and I was already in Brazil was Maria Corina Machado. And here we are, 8 years after, because we will never give up. We have said that is until the end, that is hasta el final. And we will not surrender until we achieve transition to democracy, until we have Venezuela with plenty of liberties, and when we have a nation that you all and many others can visit and can enjoy. So with that, I end my words and I present my not only my good colleague on this fight, but especially a good friend, Maria Corina Machado. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Oh, this is such a pleasure and very excited and grateful to the students, faculty, and staff at the NSF Agro Institute and the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. So grateful with you, Michelle, for joining us tonight, and so proud of David and all the members of our team that are there with you tonight. We've certainly come a long way, a very long way. We Venezuelans here at home and abroad should be very proud of what we have achieved in this long, exciting journey that has already changed our country for good and that has brought a nation together. But certainly it's not over yet. And we realize that we are facing probably, or certainly, the most difficult and dangerous part of this very long struggle to free our country. We are now at a break point. I have no doubt about it. And these are the moments that really change history. And you are watching how its history being written. I wanted tonight to share so many things with you, but I would like to address at least 3 points. First, why this is so remarkable in the terms that David is mentioned. Secondly, why we believe we can make this happen. We can defeat the regime. Why we believe they are weaker than ever before. And third, why Americans should care. I would say why all Latin Americans and people in our continent and our hemisphere should care. What this means for you, what we're doing. So I'll go very fast through those 3 issues, and I'd love to share, questions and exchange views with you tonight. Well, first of all, this is so remarkable because we are not facing a conventional dictatorship, a hierarchical one. No, we are facing a criminal structure. Venezuela has been hijacked by a band of drug kingpins that have established strong and mutual relations, benefit relations with all kinds of skilled forces from around the world, and that have turned our country into very dangerous territory, and that has forced intentionally over a quarter of our population to flee. It was by design, because it meant weakening society, dividing families, and also using migration as a way to destabilize the region. So how can a society mobilize and organize to overcome the most corrupt system, electoral system, with the totally unfair conditions? David mentioned some of them that everybody thought was simply impossible to defeat. We have had over 30 elections in the last 25 years. They all have some degree of fraud, and most were absolute scam elections. And this was the most important for the regime because they knew they were a minority, but they never imagined that we could do what we did. And I know it's so impressive, and I get very excited when we hear what we did in terms of technology, organization, having over 1 million people with specific tasks working in coordination that day. But I have to tell you that beyond that and before that, we united a country. We reached communities that people told me, a presidential candidate, that last time that came, it was in the 70s or in the 60s. People will tell me, why are you going there? There are no votes in that community. And I would say, you don't understand what we're talking about. This is not about votes. It's about hearts, the heart and soul of a society, that we need to get back our pride as being Venezuelans and trusting each other. And that's what we did. We reached out and we realized that we were a huge majority, that we all wanted the same, and we tear down barriers that they had built to divide us. And it was very impressive to me in our rallies. I used to give the mic to go to the people. And that's, believe me, dangerous in politics because you don't know what people might say. And it was surprising that most of the people that were more, passionate and enthusiastic were people that were Chavistas until days, hours ago. And they were crying or praying and hugging each other. So it was very profound. And that's why I want to tell you, this has no way back. I mean, we have not got Maduro out of power yet, but we defeated the system. We defeated it in the hearts, in the souls of our people, in the streets and in the polls. So then I get to why we think we are facing a huge opportunity to get Maduro out of power, and why we are convinced he's weaker than ever. First of all, because now there's proof. It's not 70-30 what Venezuela is feeling. If we had had minimum competitive conditions, it would have turned out 90-10 or more. And from July 28th to nowadays, today, Maduro has not gained one support of one Venezuelan. On the contrary, they have to use violence and brutal repression because they know that without repression, they would fall immediately. And the fact is that this proportion is also true in our military force, in our police corps, in public employers. Everybody feels the same. And actually, the military are the sector of our population that I believe is the worst treated, the most repressed. There are thousands of military that are being persecuted, hundreds that are disappeared, many are tortured, because the regime knows that in every single polling station where the militaries vote, we won by a landslide. And we wouldn't have been able to collect the tally sheets if it wasn't for the cooperation we received from all the military displayed all around the country. They saw it with their own eyes. They know the truth. But at the same time, Maduro, and we've worked very hard in these last 6 months since the election, the world has finally understand what the regime is. David has mentioned is international, the Inter-American Commission, the fact-finding mission, NGOs, the United Nations. Everybody now they have committed crimes against humanity, and this is a criminal structure that should not be addressed as a political actor, but as a criminal organization. And finally, I had to say that internally, even though it's not always public, a criminal structure, when runs out of resources, out of money, then you would see clashes and fractures. And that's something that it's already happening within the system. So that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. They are more dangerous than ever because they realize that they are weak and that we are stronger. So finally, I would like to close addressing the issue of why people in the Americas should care. What's in it for you? Either you're Colombian, from Central America, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, or the US. Why? And this has two sides of the coin. One is because the magnitude of the threat that the Venezuelan conflict and regime represent for hemisphere. We are talking about a country that has long relationships with Iran, China, Hezbollah, Hamas, ELN, FARC, and so on. Country that has given, a regime that has given over 10,000 Venezuelan passports to Iranians and Syrians, many of whom are Islamic terrorists that are travel around the region. Secondly, the regime has turned Venezuela from a drug channel to a drug producer. And in fact, the regime is part of the drug structure. It is important to understand this. In Mexico, for instance, the cartels fight against the government. In Venezuela, the cartel is the government, is in power. They are the law. So this is something terribly dangerous, not only for us, certainly, but for the region and for the United States. Estimates are that almost 300 tons, metric tons of drugs go through Venezuela every year. And finally, in this area, in terms of the threats, the transnational criminal organizations that operate from Venezuela. One is very famous in the United States and other countries, El Tren de Aragua, because they have operations already in 7 countries in a region. This was created by the regime. It's sponsored by the regime. It's directed by the regime. Actually, a lieutenant that was a critic of the regime, that he went to Chile to escape from the regime, and he was murdered in Chile by members of the Tren de Aragua, and the Chilean general prosecutor has proofs and has denounced that top Venezuelan government officials were the ones who gave the orders to the members of the TDA in Chile. So there's no doubt. And if anybody wants to get more proof, I wrote here the words of Admiral Alvin Huxley, the commander of South Command, that went to Congress, the US Congress, just February 13, and he said, under Maduro, Venezuela has become a major cocaine and arms trafficking hub, transforming the country into a destabilizing force in the Western Hemisphere. So that's what Venezuela is right now, the criminal hub of the Americas. But the other side is the upside, what we can turn and will turn Venezuela into as soon as we get into power. And remember, we're talking about a country where 90% of the people want the same, with no religious, political, social, racial, or regional differences. I mean, this is a society that is together and wants the same. So as soon as we reach power, imagine what's going to happen to migration. It would not only stop, we will see millions of hardworking Venezuela, honest Venezuelans that are all over the world and the United States, that they want to come back. We want to have our children here with us, our families together, working really hard to build a country that we're going to be so proud of. But also in terms of the huge opportunity in the oil sector. I mean, this has been in the news recently. We have all these recent decisions about licenses and so on. Look, there's no way Venezuela can be a major actor in the oil and gas energy while Maduro is in power. No way. Venezuela is in the last place in the world in terms of rule of law. Who serious businessman, company, transnational organization would come and invest billions of dollars in a country in which you have to have a partnership with a member or the head of a drug cartel, where there's no law, no independence, no property rights. So Venezuela can turn into the major ally as an absolutely credible and stable source of energy that would bring gas prices down, but also have huge business opportunities. As soon as we reach power, we will privatize in a transparent manner, we will open markets, and we will have a strong judiciary system. Bottom line, we're going to turn some Venezuela from the criminal hub of the Americas to the energy hub of the Americas. That's here for you, for the United States, and for every democracy in the region to benefit as well. But most of all, this is an existential fight, a spiritual fight for us as well. And we will never give up. We will win, we will bring our kids back, and we will have a free and proud and bright Venezuela. Thank you very much.
Michelle and I have a few questions before going to the Q&A with the audience. And as you have described, what we are facing in Venezuela, which is not a conventional dictatorship, but we are facing a cartel that is running the country, Cartel de los Soles, el Sons cartel. And actually, Maduro and Cabello are indicted in this country by the New York court and having a reward of $25 million, which is only compared to Osama bin Laden. What would you think the international community could do on this context to keep supporting our democratic cause that has been peaceful, has been nonviolent, but very brave, and we have shown that we won, and 90%, as you said, if we had free and fair elections, we had not been 70-30, had been 90-10. So what do you think the international community should do or must do on this context to contribute for a democratic transition in Venezuela?
This is super important, David, and they should act now. And I want to be very clear: we do not need boots on the ground. This is not about getting military from abroad here. That's not how it works with a criminal structure. I mean, we're dealing with a criminal organization. How do you weaken those structures? Through their flows of money, their resources. Once you cut them, then they really get weakened, and then you change the incentives. And then, in our case, you would reduce significantly the resources that are being used for repression, for propaganda, and for corruption. Nothing, this money does not go to schools or hospitals. We all know that a teacher in Venezuela today earns $1 a day. $1. Pensions in Venezuela are $3 a month. So we need to cut the flows of money. The one that comes from illicit networks, drug, the trafficking of gold circuit, money laundering, and the black market of oil, and the resources that were coming from licenses that had been supporting the regime for these last years. So I think yesterday's decision, President Trump's decision announced last night, yesterday in the afternoon, I think is a very important step. But there are new steps that should be taken. And and as important as these is to let the repressive structure to understand that they will be held accountable. We need to increase dramatically and fast the cost of repression.
Thank you, Maria Corina Machado, for your comments, especially seeing now with President Trump's announcement yesterday. But I want to take the conversation back to July 28th, if you so allow. You and Edmundo Gonzalez were on the ground. You saw what you saw on the election day. Could you just describe a little bit about those challenges, what the situation was like, especially for the students in the room, who we have been studying what has been happening, but to get your perspective on that would be very impressive, as well as creativity and strategies when collecting the tally sheets that were so important to bringing about this presidential candidate race.
Look, Michelle, we're so excited and grateful that John Hopkins is going to publish our report, and I know that it will turn into a huge case study, because a lot of people told us it is impossible to win an election without media and media coverage. It is impossible to win an election without money. It is impossible to win an election without a paid structure. It is impossible to win an election if you cannot move around the country. It is impossible to win an election if you have all your campaign team either in prison or under asylum. And we made it happen. And we made it happen, as you said, with creativity, but also with intelligence and hard work. We knew what was coming. I mean, we knew it was not going to be a free and fair election. We knew we had to outsmart the system. And we had to surprise them. So most of the activities we did planning for 28 and 29 were not uncovered. We need to do them with groups that had absolutely trust from us and that were separated one from the other. That's how we were able to get the equipment, the technology we needed. We brought a lot of equipment into Venezuela. And can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. It was incredible how we managed to do that and not being discovered. So we managed to please, first the communication. Everything was done in an organic manner. So we were able to connect with people using the social media, as David was saying, WhatsApp and so on. It was very impressive to me because many places I reached that they didn't have media or internet or electricity, people would say, I found out you were coming here, Maria Corina, because my son that lives in Lima or my sister that lives in Miami told me that you were coming here. And the families always find a way to communicate. So it was impressive. And going back to the final day and how we prepared to collect the tally sheets, it was something very dangerous. very dangerous, because we knew that if the regime found out, all the operation would be dismantled. So we took all kinds of procedures, and we had several platforms of reporting results. We had an application, an app in real time in the tally centers. 35% of them did not have access to the internet, so we had to report using SMS, and that went to another platform that integrated with the results we had with the scanned version of the tally checks. And when we passed that threshold, that we knew that we had enough tally sheets and enough votes already counted for Edmundo, that even if Maduro got 100% of what's left, when we passed that threshold, I realized I said, we did it. We did it. And it also felt like a miracle, believe me, because we had so many conditions and obstacles again. So I'm very proud of the Venezuelan people, and I think we have set a new standard to defend the right of the people under tyranny.
Maria Corina, on the human aspect, because all the challenges, not only that you're facing, we are living in a world that is very common to have Zoom meetings and Zoom conferences, but this is not the type of Zoom conferences that we want to, because you are in hiding in a safe house, and you have been under that condition for months because the regime is looking after you. So obviously you will not provide details, but I think for many here will be important to hear from you as a leader that you have gone beyond Venezuela, what is to be under that condition, and also if you can describe the situation of the members of our team, very close to you, very close to me, that are in the Argentine embassy, which is under responsibility of the Brazilian government that has been there for a year, and they are under a very extreme conditions as we speak.
Oh, it's very hard to describe, David and Michelle, and friends, what this has turned to us. We have 1,194 people detained after the election. Many of them were polling monitors. They went to their houses. Some of them, in some cases, if they didn't find them, they would take their families to pressure them to give in. Some of them were kids that were passing in the streets or peacefully protesting, and they found in their WhatsApp that they had a picture of Edmundo or myself. And many of them are political leaders of different parties and our our campaign team. I have very, very dear friends that are in prison since January 23rd of last year, more than a year. And our whole campaign team was accused, and the arrest warrants were issued on March 20th. So we are almost a year there. Since that day, 6 members of our team asked for asylum in the Argentinian embassy. They were able to get there, and during a few months, operation was regular. Their families could come and visit. They would get everything they needed, doctors, attention, whatever. Just after the election, when the Argentinian government recognized the results that we had won, the Maduro regime cut relations with 7 Latin American countries and threw all the diplomatic personnel out, including the Argentinians. So Brazil accepted to take protection under the Argentinian embassy. But starting in September, the siege around the embassy started. They have put more and more and more and more pressure of police. They took over and threw away the honors of the houses surrounding the embassy, where they have now military commandos with people with, long firearms. In November, they cut the power supply of the house, so they started relying on an engine that had to work a few hours a day, but it stopped working last week. So they run out of water, run out of electricity, and they're running out of food, and they are being threatened every single day that they would be taking over. That's not the only part. The only part is the reaction or the no reaction from the diplomatic community in Venezuela. And this is something that it's very sad to us, because this is a terrible precedent that has never happened in our region before. In my personal case, I mean, this is the kind of things they do. They just today they went. Agents of the regime went to my house, my home, where I used to live with my children, and they tried to get in by force. They didn't do it today. They said they were coming back. But that's the kind of threats that we face every day. And my mother's house, where she lives alone, is now currently surrounded by the police. They don't let anybody come and visit her since a few weeks ago.
Mother Corina, we send you our blessings, our love, especially, and your care for you and your family, and everyone, your loved ones, everyone that you have just described. And now over to you all. We wanted this to be a discussion, an opportunity for you to open up the floor, ask your questions. We have our lovely two with the mics, so you can go ahead and get started.
Just to share, hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm Mary Bruce, Assistant Director of SNF Agora. For Q&A, we are sure there's lots and lots of questions and want to hear from as many voices as possible. So Young and I will be taking 4 questions to see if any themes come up. And then David, if you could help moderate to see if there are themes and pull the most resonant parts for you and Maria. Okay, so we'll be taking 4 questions, not answering them one at a time, though.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eitan Casaverde. I'm a second-year MAIR student here at SAIS. I'm Venezuelan. I was born in Caracas and have not been able to go back since 2008. David, Michelle, Maria Corina Machado, thank you so much for the ground setting, talking about this. Is it's personal, but it's also vital. I think my main question was the conversation talked a lot about the situation on the ground, and specifically, I think we touched a little bit on on what the United States kind of response should be. But I wanted to ask about if there are any opinions on what some of the other regional powers could be doing to help more. I know we talked a little bit right now about the Brazil taking over the Argentinian embassy, but I know, for example, post-elections, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil were trying to negotiate with the regime. So I wanted to hear about, in your opinions, what are some of the efforts that could be done in order to maybe push the agenda a little bit more from the regional allies and friends. Thank you.
So a question on regional influences, ways to put pressure on the regime. A second question.
Hi. Hello?
Yep.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier in your presentation that you want to transform Venezuela from a criminal hub to an energy hub. I was wondering what steps you will take once you're empowered to catalyze this transformation, and how would this be affected by President Trump's announcement to end Venezuela's permit to export oil to the United States?
A third question. So that was a question on the energy hub and Trump's new announcements around that.
So I'm Emily Helscher, and this is a little bit of a 2-part question. One of the other opposition leaders was mentioning how Iran, Cuba, China, and Russia are all holding up the Venezuelan state. So what are ways that we could weaken the network of autocracy? And I also know that one of Maduro's strategies is trying to stir people against various opposition leaders, which will harm a future transition to democracy. So what can people do to elevate the voices of the persecuted Venezuelans and fight back against Maduro's disinformation? Thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you.
And moving to Young for a fourth question, that was a question on both activating support and deactivating other kinds of support.
Buenas tardes. So I'm actually from, I'm a guest here. I'm from UC Irvine, back in California, but it's great to be here. My question is more, what is your sort of movement for change differ from Juan Guaido's back in, a few years ago? I know there was similar attempts made to, and for some time he was declared as a legitimate president across many nations and many countries. But what differs this time around with Maria Corina and Urrutia Gonzalez? I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the first name, but yes. And what differs from that, and sort of what like vision do you have for the democracy, like once you're like referring back to my my colleague's point, sort of what sort of democratic model do you look for, like for past or present, to kind of like as a vision for Venezuela in the future? And thank you.
And then turning it back over, David, to help moderate between you and Maria, a
Sure.
question around what makes this different and who else are you looking to?
Oh, go ahead, Maria Corina.
Should we divide the questions? I'll start with the first one and then you go and then I go back. Okay. Well, I think it's Ayrton, his name, from Venezuela. I think this is a very important question. I mean, Latin America has to be and can be very useful and should be very active. David has been involved in many of our strategies and reaching out to many countries in the region. We say we have 11 countries that have been quite committed to the transition in Venezuela, and I believe they should form this front line in terms of setting high standards to press not only the United States and Europe and other regions in terms of what should be done. And as I said, it's the time for joint statements was over a long time ago, and there are specific actions that can be taken in terms of international justice, in terms of law enforcement, blocking channels of illegal resources, and giving and sending a firm and clear message to Maduro that the world will never turn the page, and that makes it harder for him every day to stay in power in order to change those incentives. Having said that, I have to mention that I didn't enough is what we have to do in here in Venezuela. We are not waiting for the world to do, this job for us. We have a huge structure. We have 90% of the country that wants change, and we are readapting what used to be structures for an electoral process for structures that now have to make sure a regime decides or finally steps aside. And this is a new phase that we are working into under huge persecution, but people are doing their job, even if it's not being seen. I'll jump to the final question. I think that everything is different because Venezuela changed. I mean, the primary process that the regime underestimated, and I think most in the status quo didn't realize what was happening. They thought only a couple thousand people would show up and it would be a failure, and that we wouldn't be able to truly unite a country around a legitimate leadership. And I run a primary that was based on the truth, telling people what I really want to do, and the values we share, we believe we share, about a totally new relationship between the states and the citizens, and open societies with open markets and individual freedoms, and a strong value for families and dignity of every individual. When I spoke about, privatizing sectors, including the oil sector, believe me, the reaction in most of the other political parties and leaders wasn't good, but people truly supported it because they think Venezuela has changed. And that's what was demonstrated on the primaries, and that's what kept on growing. And we were able to unite a nation around vision, values, and concrete ideas of how to transform our lives. So that's why I think this is totally different from anything we had before. And we had an election, and we had an election that we won by a landslide that had never been before. So it's leadership legitimized by votes and by a huge majority of the people's trust. And I would say at the end, that's the big, big, important new ingredient, trust between each other. Thank you. Go ahead, Eric.
Yes. Well, just just to add, if I may, on the global partners, I think I think a regional or a global mechanism of support to tackle illicit economic activities coming from Venezuela is needed. Some people still believe that the main source of finance to the regime is oil, and it is not. It is drugs, it is illegal mining, it is smuggling, especially of fuel, it is human trafficking. So I think more need to be done on that, because if they start not having that money, they will be in trouble. Regarding the other two questions on the platform of activism, there are different initiatives which are dissidents from those autocracies are getting aligned as a fellow of RDI. There are dissidents from Nicaragua or Cuba or China or among others that we're working together. But I think that not only we have to do it by ourselves, we need the support from democracies across the world, because if not, that's going to be only a romantic way to fight to restore our democracies. The Hub of the Americas, which is one of your favorite topics, so you can compliment me on that, Maria Corina. But I'm going to speak on the other part. This is a great opportunity to say that there's no biggest myth where the sanctions are the problem. Bulk of the license. I have to say that when this century started, Venezuela was producing 3.2 million oil barrels a day. There was a plan to get to 6 million oil barrels a day. When for the first time economic sanctions were imposed in 2019, Venezuela was already producing 1 million oil barrels a day. Country was already in shatters. Almost 5 million people had fled. By that moment, we had already 80% of the people living in poverty, extreme poverty. We already had 9.3 million people not eating 3 times a day, which still is the largest population on that situation in the Western Hemisphere and the 4th largest in the world. And we need to understand that we're facing probably the biggest kleptocracy system in modern times across the globe. And it is not the biggest, one of the biggest. So it might have been something that has affected other nations, but it's not our case. And sanctions were released a year and a half ago, and the regime has not been able to produce even 1 million oil barrels a day because the oil industry is destroyed. That's the reality. And the state-owned company, Petróleos de Venezuela, PDVSA, has become machinery of money laundering and one of the worst corruption schemes that you can ever imagine. And by the way, Since sanctions were released by the economic sanctions were by the end of 2023, approximately 1 million Venezuelans fled the country. So people are not fleeing Venezuela because of sanctions. People are fleeing Venezuela because they don't have liberties, because they don't have opportunities, and they are heavy persecuted. Having said that, Maria Corina, I will give the word back to you because I want you to explain, because you're always getting inspired on that, on how we can build Venezuela as the energy hub of the America.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Well, as you were saying, I mean, just in oil, Venezuela should be producing today 6 or 7 million barrels a day, and we're barely at 1. And it's not going to increase dramatically if you have a criminal regime in power. So what do we have to change? We have to change everything. I mean, Venezuela is back in business in the energy sector. That's the message we're bringing worldwide, because we're going to have different roles. I mean, the state will no longer be producing, but will be, of course, the regulator with a very competitive and very transparent and efficient agency. And we will open markets to the private sector, local, international, small, medium, large. I mean, everybody has the opportunity to invest in a country that has not only the biggest oil reserves in the world, but one of the most competitive cost structure in the world. Secondly, the size of the business. I mean, right now, when you see people excited because they are doing some business with Maduro, we're talking about crumbs. I mean, these are businesses that run into the millions. We are talking about trillions that can be produced in Venezuela in terms of financial income. I mean, this is huge, that what can be done, not only in oil and gas, I have to say, also in renewable energies, which Venezuela is super competitive. Third, the matter of rules of law. We know we have a huge moral risk for what the regime has done to companies that invested in Venezuela. They were robbed, expropriated, confiscated. And we believe we need to have a strong international jurisdiction that gives, support and trust to these investors. And finally, the incentives. We're going to make the most competitive fiscal structure that you will see in the region, and you will see the flows of resources coming into Venezuela, and not only producing employment, creating employment, benefiting the rest of the sectors of our economy. We have huge opportunities in minerals, infrastructure, telecommunication, tourism. We have it all, but also having transparent and very lucrative activities in a country that will be booming in a moment of nearshoring in our region. So this is a huge opportunity for us. We are very excited. I have been in contact with many international oil companies and energy companies that tell us that as soon as we have a democratic transition, they will come and invest in Venezuela. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It was great to be with you, and trust our people, because this fight is until the end, and we will make it happen. Venezuela will be free. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't know if you can see the audience here, but we are giving you a standing ovation.
Thank you.
And we are also grateful for your time and your work and your energy. It's incredibly inspiring. We have just a minute or two left together. So as we move to close, a final question for Maria and David. As folks here in Washington, D.C., what is one thing we should know, our key takeaway? What's the one thing we should know or do about what we've talked about tonight? Easy one, right?
Well, I think I'm going to start this. I'm on my experience on when I have been invited to other universities or I have been able to speak here at SAI. People sharing experiences coming from the ground. I think it's so powerful to listen, like we have heard Maria Corina Machado speaking live from a safe house on what not only she but our team and many others have gone through, and this is very important to have the discussion. Second, never ever take democracy for granted. Never take liberties, freedom, for rule of law for granted. Venezuela was a reference during the second half of the 20th century for a stable democracy, for a prosperous economy. And since 1999, or when in 1999 this nightmare started, democracy was used to destroy democracy. So never take that for granted. Also, it's important to always respect, be tolerant, not simplify sometimes comparisons. Say, oh, this country is getting like Venezuela. No, because you have already heard all our strategy that we have gone through, and that when you are so sometimes it's difficult to put in words, but this is a purpose of life for Maria Corina and I, among others. This is a purpose of life. We want to have a free nation. We want to have a nation of plenty of opportunities. We want to have our nation to be prosperous. We want to have many Venezuelans who have fled to go back, to be part of the rebuilding, and more importantly, to be again with our families. That's what we want. And then, como decimos, how we say in Spanish, or the sky is the limit. El cielo es el límite. So thank you so much, Maria Corina.
Thank you, David. You were great. Thank you all. I just have to say, speak out and loud. Stick to the truth. Trust in your own forces. And believe me, they have told us it was impossible to do everything we've done. And look where we are right now. So we are the kind of people that make the impossible possible. And we're making history together, and we need you. We need you now. So thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Well done.
A huge round of applause to our esteemed guests. We're so grateful. Both sobering and inspiring, and a final call to listen, learn, take risks, don't take it for granted, be in community and speak out loud. Again, I'm Mary Bruce with SNF Agora. I want to thank the speakers, our esteemed moderator, all of you. Time is a precious resource. Thank you for being in this Agora with us. To the whole team that made it possible, and all the teams behind the scenes, and most importantly, to the countless individuals who have worked and continue to work and will work to build healthy global democracies everywhere. Holding them in my heart. And just a quick plug that SNF Agora and the Hopkins Bloomberg Center has lots of upcoming events. There's one in about a month on March 25th on the role of the President Trump on global democracy, including an attorney from USAID and a scholar from Johns Hopkins. So we will be sending also an event survey. We really take your ideas seriously. So if you have suggestions like having David and Maria to come back, let us know and we'll do everything we can. So thank you to the Bloomberg Center and the whole community here. Have a lovely and safe evening.
Thank you.
Michelle.